In the year 1847, in the Grand Duchy of Ravenshollow, tragedy struck the most powerful family in all the land. The Duke of Ravenshollow, Alexander Thornfield, stood in the marble halls of his ancestral estate, his dark eyes filled with a pain so deep it seemed to echo through the very stones of the castle walls. His beloved wife, Duchess Isabella, had died bringing their son into this world. The baby boy, weak and frail, clung to life by the thinnest of threads. The Duke's hands shook as he held the tiny bundle, feeling the weight of both his greatest joy and his deepest sorrow. "Your Grace," whispered the head housekeeper, Mrs. Pemberton, her own eyes red with tears. "The child, he needs a wet nurse. Without proper nourishment, he will not survive the week." Alexander closed his eyes, fighting back the wave of grief that threatened to consume him. He had lost his wife. He could not lose his son too. "Send word throughout the duchy," he commanded, his voice rough with emotion. "Find me the best wet nurse in all the land. I care not what it costs." But what the Duke did not know was that fate had already set in motion a chain of events that would change his life forever. 3 days earlier, in the humble village of Millbrook, a young woman named Elena Hartwell had made the most heartbreaking sacrifice a mother could ever make. Elena sat by her window, staring out at the rain that seemed to match the tears falling down her cheeks. Her own baby boy, barely 2 months old, lay sleeping in his cradle, but their time together was running out, and Elena knew it. The plague had taken her husband, Thomas, just weeks after their son's birth. With no money, no family, and no way to feed herself, Elena's milk had begun to dry up. Her precious child grew weaker each day, his tiny cries becoming fainter and fainter. That morning, a desperate message had reached her village. The Duke of Ravenshollow was offering more gold than most people saw in a lifetime for a wet nurse. But there was one condition: the woman would have to live at the castle, caring for the Duke's child as if it were her own. Elena's heart shattered as she realized what this meant. She could save the Duke's baby, but only by leaving her own child behind. And with no milk left to give, her son would surely die without her. But then, through her tears, Elena saw her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Whitmore, approaching her cottage. The kind woman had been trying to help Elena and the baby, bringing what little food she could spare. "Elena, dear," Mrs. Whitmore said softly, entering the small cottage, "I heard about the Duke's offer. You must go." "I cannot leave my baby," Elena whispered, her voice breaking. "He is all I have left of Thomas." Mrs. Whitmore's eyes filled with understanding and sorrow. "Child, look at your son. Look at how weak he has become. You have no milk left to give him, but there is another way." Elena looked up, hope flickering in her desperate eyes. "My sister in the next village, she has just lost her own baby but still has milk. She is kind and good, and she would care for your son as her own. You could send the Duke's gold to pay for his care. This way, both babies might live." The choice was impossible, but Elena knew what she had to do. With tears streaming down her face, she kissed her sleeping son's forehead one last time. "Mama will make sure you live, my darling," she whispered, "even if it means I can never hold you again." And so, Elena Hartwell made the ultimate sacrifice. She gave up her own child to save another's, carrying her secret pain to the grand castle of Ravenshollow. When Elena arrived at the castle, she was immediately brought before the Duke. Alexander looked up from his desk where he had been trying to handle affairs, while his infant son cried inconsolably in the nursery above. The moment Elena stepped into the room, something stirred in the Duke's chest. She was not what he had expected. Where he had imagined finding some crude village woman, instead stood a lady of remarkable grace. Her chestnut hair was neatly arranged despite her simple dress, and her green eyes, though red-rimmed from crying, held a depth of compassion that took his breath away. "Your Grace," Elena said, curtsying low. "I am Elena Hartwell. I have come about the position of wet nurse for your son." Alexander studied her carefully. There was something about her, a quality he could not name, that set her apart from anyone he had ever met. "You have recently given birth?" he asked, though he already knew the answer from the way she carried herself. "Yes, Your Grace," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the pain in her heart. "I can provide for your child what he needs." "And your own baby?" Elena's breath caught, but she had prepared for this question. "My child is being cared for by family." "Your Grace, I am free to devote myself entirely to your son's needs." It was not entirely a lie, Elena told herself. Mrs. Whitmore's sister was caring for her baby, and the woman had promised to love him as family. But the half-truth felt like glass in her throat. Alexander nodded, though something in Elena's eyes made him wonder if there was more to her story. "Very well, Mrs. Pemberton will show you to the nursery. My son has been struggling to feed. The previous women we tried." He paused, his jaw tightening. They were not successful. As Elena followed the housekeeper through the grand corridors of the castle, she marveled at the luxury surrounding her. Crystal chandeliers hung from painted ceilings, and portraits of noble ancestors gazed down from gilded frames. It was a world so different from her simple cottage that it might as well have been another realm entirely. But when they reached the nursery, all thoughts of grandeur fled from Elena's mind. There, in an elaborate cradle fit for a prince, lay the smallest, most fragile baby she had ever seen. His tiny face was red from crying, and his little fists waved weakly in the air. "Poor little lamb," Elena whispered, moving toward the cradle without thinking. "He is so hungry." Mrs. Pemberton watched in amazement as Elena gently lifted the baby from his cradle. The child, who had been crying for hours, immediately calmed in her arms. It was as if he sensed that salvation had finally arrived. "Well, I never," breathed the housekeeper. "In all my years I have never seen anything like it. It is as though he knows you are here to help him." Elena settled into the comfortable chair beside the window, her heart aching, as she prepared to nurse another woman's child, while her own lay in a stranger's arms, miles away. But as she looked down at the Duke's son, so small and helpless, she felt a fierce protective instinct awaken within her. "There now, little one," she whispered softly. "You are safe now. I will take care of you." As the baby began to feed, Elena felt both joy and sorrow warring in her chest. Joy that this precious child would live and grow strong, and sorrow that her own son would never again know her touch. But she had made her choice, and she would live with it, no matter how it broke her heart. What Elena did not see was the Duke himself, standing silently in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. Alexander had followed them to the nursery, worried about his son, but now he found himself frozen in place. There was something almost magical about the sight before him. Elena sat bathed in the golden light from the window, her face soft with maternal love, as she cradled his child. For a moment it was as if Isabella had never left, as if his family was somehow whole again. But this woman was not Isabella. She was someone else entirely, someone who had brought peace to his son's cries and a strange stirring to his own guarded heart. Alexander stepped back into the shadows, not wanting to disturb the tender scene, but he could not tear his eyes away from Elena's face. There was sadness there, hidden beneath her gentle smile. What secrets did she carry, and why did he find himself caring so much about the answer? Over the following days, Elena settled into life at the castle with a grace that surprised everyone. She tended to the baby whom the Duke had named James after his own father, with a devotion that went far beyond duty. She sang to him, told him stories and held him close during the long nights when he fussed. The servants, initially skeptical of the village woman in their midst, soon came to adore her. Elena treated everyone with kindness, from the lowest scullery maid to Mrs. Pemberton herself. She never put on airs or demanded special treatment, despite her important role in caring for the heir to the duchy. "She is like an angel sent from heaven," one of the kitchen maids whispered to another. "Have you seen how the little master smiles when she holds him? He never did that before she came." It was true. Baby James was thriving under Elena's care. His color improved. He grew stronger each day, and his cries were now those of a healthy, contented child rather than the weak wails of desperation that had haunted the castle before. But late at night, when the castle was quiet and everyone else slept, Elena would stand by her window and weep for the child she had left behind. She had received one letter from Mrs. Whitmore's sister, assuring her that her son was well and growing strong. But the brief message only made her heartache worse. She was missing everything: his first smile, the way he would grip her finger, the sweet weight of him in her arms. What Elena did not know was that someone else also spent the long nights sleepless and walking the halls. Duke Alexander found himself drawn again and again to the nursery, where he would stand in the doorway and watch Elena tend to his son. He told himself it was concern for James that brought him there, but deep in his heart he knew it was something more. There was a quality about Elena that fascinated him. She moved through the castle like a lady born to it, yet she had come from humble origins. She spoke with education and refinement, yet claimed to be a simple village woman, and there was that sadness in her eyes, the pain she tried so hard to hide. One night, unable to sleep, Alexander made his way to the nursery, as had become his habit. But this time he found Elena not tending to James, but sitting by the window with tears streaming down her face. She held a small locket in her hands, staring at whatever was inside with such heartbreak that it made his own chest tighten with sympathy. "Elena," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She jumped, quickly closing the locket and wiping her tears. "Your Grace, I did not hear you approach. Is something wrong? Is James—" "James is fine," Alexander assured her, stepping into the room. "I could not sleep and came to check on him, but I find myself more concerned about you. What troubles you so deeply?" Elena turned away, unable to meet his eyes. "It is nothing, Your Grace. Just melancholy. It will pass." But Alexander moved closer, drawn by an instinct he did not fully understand. "It is not nothing if it causes you such pain. You have been here a fortnight, and I have seen this sadness in you every day. Will you not tell me what burdens your heart?" For a moment Elena almost broke. The kindness in his voice, the genuine concern in his dark eyes, made her want to pour out the whole truth. But she could not. If he knew what she had done, if he learned that she had abandoned her own child to care for his, would he think her a monster? Would he send her away and find another wet nurse for James? "I am well, Your Grace," she said finally. "Please do not trouble yourself with my concerns." Alexander frowned, frustrated by her refusal to confide in him. But something in her manner told him that pushing would only cause her more pain. Instead, he moved to stand beside her at the window, looking out at the moonlit gardens below. "You know," he said quietly, "Isabella used to stand at this very window when she was carrying James. She would place her hands on her belly and talk to him, telling him about all the things she would show him when he was born. The rose garden, the stables, the old oak tree where I carved her initials when we were first married." Elena's heart clenched at the pain in his voice. She looked up at his profile, seeing the grief he carried like a heavy cloak around his shoulders. "She must have been very beautiful," Elena said softly. "She was," Alexander replied. But more than that, she was kind. She had a way of making everyone around her feel special, feel loved. The servants adored her, the tenants came to her with their troubles, and she never turned anyone away empty-handed. She sounds wonderful. Alexander turned to look at Elena then, his eyes intense. She was. But you know what strikes me as remarkable? James has never known his mother's touch, yet he responds to you as if you were the one who carried him. There is something about you, Elena, something that soothes not just my son, but everyone you encounter, even me. Elena's breath caught at his words. There was something in his tone, something in the way he looked at her, that made her pulse quicken. But she could not, would not, allow herself to read more into it than was there. I am simply doing my duty, Your Grace, she whispered. No, Alexander said, his voice firm. What you do goes far beyond duty. You love him as if he were your own child. If only he knew how true those words were, how loving James felt, both like a betrayal of her own son and the most natural thing in the world. Elena closed her eyes, fighting back fresh tears. He is easy to love, she managed to say. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, then reached out and gently touched her arm. As are you, Elena Hartwell. As are you. Before Elena could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with her racing heart and the echo of his words. She sank into the chair beside James's cradle, her mind spinning. Had she imagined the warmth, the almost tender note in his voice? And more importantly, what was happening to her own heart? She had come here to save a child, to earn money to support her own son. She had not expected to find herself drawn to the grieving Duke, to feel her heart stir with feelings she had no right to experience. She was a servant in his house, nothing more, and she was hiding a secret that would destroy any chance of what? What was she even hoping for? Elena forced herself to focus on the truth of her situation. She was here to care for James, to ensure he grew strong and healthy. Anything else was foolishness, a dream that could never become reality. She was not a duchess. She was not even truly free to give her heart to anyone, not when her own child needed her support. But even as she told herself these things, Elena could not forget the way Alexander had looked at her, the gentleness in his voice when he spoke her name. And despite all her logical arguments, her heart continued to hope for things she knew she could never have. The next morning brought unexpected visitors to the castle. Elena was in the garden with James, enjoying the warm sunshine and fresh air, when a carriage bearing the royal coat of arms arrived with great ceremony. Who could that be? Wondered Mrs. Pemberton, who had come to fetch Elena for the baby's feeding. They soon had their answer when Alexander appeared, escorting an elegantly dressed woman of middle years who carried herself with unmistakable authority. Elena, Alexander called, approaching the garden bench where she sat with James. I would like you to meet Lady Margaret Ashworth, my late wife's sister. Margaret, this is Elena Hartwell, James's wet nurse. Lady Margaret's eyes swept over Elena with obvious disapproval. Everything about her expression suggested that she found Elena lacking in some fundamental way. So this is the village woman you hired, Lady Margaret said, her tone cool. I must say, Alexander, I am surprised. When I heard you had taken on a wet nurse from the common folk, I expected someone more appropriate to her station. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her expression calm and respectful. My lady, she said, curtsying carefully while still holding James. May I see my nephew? Lady Margaret asked, though her tone suggested it was more command than request. Elena hesitated, glancing at Alexander for guidance. Something in his expression had hardened at his sister-in-law's obvious disdain for Elena. Of course, Alexander said firmly. Elena, would you please show Margaret how well James is thriving? Elena rose and approached Lady Margaret, gently presenting the baby. James, now healthy and robust at nearly 2 months old, gazed up at his aunt with bright, curious eyes. "My goodness," Lady Margaret breathed, her entire demeanor changing as she looked at the child. "He is so much stronger than when I saw him last. And look at those cheeks. He has filled out beautifully." "Elena's care has worked miracles," Alexander said, his voice warm with gratitude. "James was near death when she arrived. Now look at him." Lady Margaret glanced between Elena and the baby, her expression thoughtful. "I see. And you say she is from the village?" "From Millbrook," Elena said quietly. I am honored to care for his lordship." Something in Elena's manner seemed to give Lady Margaret pause. The older woman studied her more carefully, taking in Elena's natural grace, her refined speech, the gentle confidence with which she held the baby. "Tell me, Miss Hartwell," Lady Margaret said slowly, "what is your background? You seem unusual for a village wet nurse." Elena's heart began to race. She had known this moment would come eventually, when someone would question her story more closely. "I was educated by the village priest. My lady, my late husband valued learning." It was true, as far as it went. Father Benedict had indeed taught her to read and write, recognizing her quick mind, and Thomas had encouraged her studies, proud of his intelligent wife. But Elena could see that Lady Margaret was not entirely satisfied with this explanation. "Your husband?" Lady Margaret pressed. "What was his profession?" "He was a blacksmith, my lady. He died of the plague shortly after our—" Elena's voice faltered as she almost said, "Our child was born," but caught herself just in time, "shortly after we were married." Alexander was watching this exchange with growing concern. He could see Elena's distress, the way her hands trembled slightly as she held James. Something was not right about her story. He was becoming more and more certain of it. "I am sorry for your loss," Lady Margaret said, her tone softening slightly. "The plague has taken too many good people. But tell me, if you were recently married and your husband died so soon after, how is it that you have milk for my nephew?" Elena's world tilted. She had not expected such a direct question, had not prepared for it. The blood drained from her face as she struggled to find an answer that would not reveal her secret. She began, then stopped, her mind racing. Alexander stepped forward, sensing Elena's panic. "Margaret, perhaps these questions can wait. Elena has been through enough tragedy, and she has served our family faithfully." But Lady Margaret was not to be deterred. Her years as a society matron had taught her to recognize when someone was hiding something important. "Alexander, surely you can see that something is amiss here. This woman's story does not add up. If she was recently married and widowed, with no children of her own, how does she have milk to nurse James?" The question hung in the air like a sword, ready to fall. Elena clutched James closer to her chest, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. She could feel Alexander's eyes on her, could sense his growing confusion and concern. "Please," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible, "I can explain." But before she could say another word, Lady Margaret's expression changed from suspicion to understanding, and then to horror. "Oh, my dear God," she breathed, "you have a child, you have a baby of your own, and you left him to come here." Elena's composure finally shattered. She sank onto the garden bench, still holding James protectively as tears streamed down her face. There was no point in denying it now. The truth was written in her pain for anyone with eyes to see. "Where is your child?" Alexander demanded, his voice sharp with shock. "Where is your baby?" Elena could barely speak through her sobs. He is safe. He is being cared for. I would never have left him if there had been any other choice. But why? Alexander pressed, moving closer. Why would you leave your own infant to nurse mine? Elena looked up at him through her tears, seeing the confusion and growing anger in his dark eyes. She had dreaded this moment, had known it would come eventually, but she had hoped to have more time. Time to prove her devotion to James, time to show that her love for the Duke's son was real and pure, not just born of duty. Because he was dying, she whispered. My baby was dying, and I had no milk left to give him. No money for food, no way to care for him properly. But your offer, the gold you promised, it was enough to pay for his care with someone who could feed him properly. Lady Margaret gasped, pressing her hand to her chest. You sold your services to save your own child. I gave up my child to save yours, Elena said, looking directly at Alexander. I sacrificed everything I had, everything I loved, so that both our sons might live, and I would do it again, because it was the only way. Alexander stared at her, his mind reeling. This was not what he had expected, not at all. He had imagined various explanations for Elena's sadness, her mysterious past, but never this, never such a heartbreaking sacrifice. You left your baby, he said slowly, as if trying to understand. You left your own child to come here and nurse mine. Yes, Elena said simply, because it was the only way either of them would survive. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sounds were Elena's quiet sobs and the gentle cooing of baby James, still content in her arms despite the tension surrounding him. Finally, Lady Margaret spoke, her voice softer than before. How old was your child when you left him? 2 months, Elena whispered. The same age as James, when I arrived. Alexander felt something crack inside his chest. 2 months old. A tiny baby, barely begun in life, and Elena had given him up to save another child she had never even met. The sacrifice was so enormous, so selfless, that it took his breath away. What is his name? He asked quietly. Elena looked up at him in surprise. Your Grace, your son. What is his name? William, Elena said, her voice breaking on the word. His name is William Thomas Hartwell. Alexander nodded, filing the name away in his memory. William. Elena's son, the child she had sacrificed everything for. And he is well. He is thriving. According to the letters I receive, yes. Mrs. Whitmore's sister has been caring for him. She is kind and good, and she has milk enough for both her own child and mine. The gold I earn here pays for his care and ensures he wants for nothing. But you have not seen him since you left? Lady Margaret asked gently. Elena shook her head, fresh tears falling. I cannot leave my post here. James needs me, and I cannot risk losing this position. It is William's lifeline. Alexander felt as though he was seeing Elena clearly for the first time. Not just the gentle, caring woman who had saved his son's life, but the heartbroken mother who had given up everything to do so. The depth of her sacrifice was staggering. Elena, he said softly, kneeling beside the bench where she sat. Look at me. Slowly, she raised her eyes to meet his. What you did, he said carefully, leaving your own child to save mine. I do not know whether to call it the most selfless act I have ever witnessed, or the most heartbreaking. Perhaps it is both. I know it seems cruel, Elena said, her voice shaking. I know people will think me a terrible mother for leaving my baby, but he was dying. Your Grace. Slowly starving because I had nothing left to give him. At least this way, he lives, he grows strong and healthy, even if it means I cannot hold him. Alexander reached out and gently took her free hand in his. Elena, you are not a terrible mother. You are a woman who faced an impossible choice and found a way to save both children. That takes a strength and love I can barely comprehend." Lady Margaret, who had been watching this exchange with growing amazement, finally spoke. "My dear girl, what you have done, it is extraordinary. To give up your own child for the sake of another. I have never heard of such sacrifice." Elena looked between them, hardly daring to believe that they were not disgusted by her confession. "You do not think me a monster for abandoning my baby?" "You did not abandon him," Alexander said firmly. "You ensured his survival in the only way you could. There is a vast difference between the two." "But I still left him," Elena whispered. "I still chose to care for your son instead of my own. Because caring for my son was the only way to save yours," Alexander replied. "Elena, do you not see? You found a way to be a mother to both children. James is thriving because of your love and care, and William is alive because of your sacrifice. You saved them both." Elena felt as though a weight she had been carrying for months was finally beginning to lift. She had expected condemnation, disgust, perhaps even immediate dismissal. Instead, she found understanding and, was it possible, admiration. "I think about him every day," she admitted. "I wonder if he has grown, if he has learned to smile, if he knows somehow that his mama loves him even though she cannot be with him." "Of course he knows," Lady Margaret said gently. "A mother's love transcends distance, my dear. Your William knows he is loved." Alexander studied Elena's face, seeing the truth of her words written in her tears. "Is this why you look so sad? Some evenings, why I have found you weeping by the window?" Elena nodded. "I miss him so much, it feels like a physical pain. But I also love James with all my heart. It feels like a betrayal sometimes to love another woman's child when my own is growing up without me." "It is not a betrayal," Alexander said firmly. "Isabella would be grateful beyond words to know that her son is loved so deeply. And your William, when he is old enough to understand, he will be proud of his mother's courage." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of Elena's revelation settling over them all. Then James began to fuss, reminding them of his presence and needs. "He is hungry," Elena said, automatically shifting to soothe the baby. "Go," Alexander said gently. "Take him inside and feed him. We will speak more of this later." Elena rose on unsteady legs, still hardly believing that her secret was out and that she had not been condemned for it. As she walked toward the castle, she could hear Alexander and Lady Margaret speaking in low voices behind her. "Alexander," Lady Margaret was saying, "that woman is remarkable. What she has done, the sacrifice she has made." "I know," Alexander replied, his voice thoughtful. "I have never encountered anything like it. She loves James as if he were her own, because in many ways he is. She has chosen to be his mother, just as surely as if she had given birth to him herself." Alexander was quiet for a moment. "Margaret, what am I to do with this knowledge? How do I process the fact that my son's wet nurse has made such an enormous sacrifice for his sake?" "You honor it," Lady Margaret said simply. "You ensure that her sacrifice was not in vain, and perhaps you consider what it means that such a woman has come into your life." "What do you mean?" Lady Margaret smiled slightly. "Alexander, I have watched you these past months, drowning in grief and guilt over Isabella's death. But today, watching you with that young woman, I saw something I have not seen since before Isabella died. I saw you truly care about someone again." Alexander frowned. "She is James's wet nurse. Of course I care about her well-being. She is essential to my son's health." "Is that all?" Lady Margaret challenged, because from where I was standing, it looked like a great deal more than concern for an employee. Alexander opened his mouth to deny it, then closed it again. Could Margaret be right? Had his feelings for Elena grown beyond mere gratitude and respect? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Even if that were true, he said finally, it is impossible. She is a village woman, a wet nurse. I am a duke. The difference in our stations means nothing in the face of what she has shown herself to be. Lady Margaret interrupted. Alexander, that woman in there has demonstrated more nobility, more true aristocracy of spirit than most of the titled ladies I know. Birth is an accident. Character is a choice. And Elena Hartwell has shown character that would put most duchesses to shame. Alexander stared toward the castle, his mind churning. Could it be possible? Could he be falling in love with Elena? And if he was, what could he possibly do about it? Inside the castle, Elena settled into the comfortable chair in the nursery, her hands still shaking slightly from the emotional confrontation in the garden. James latched on eagerly, and she found herself relaxing as she watched his contented face. Your papa knows the truth now, little one, she whispered to him. I hope he does not think less of me for it. But even as she spoke the words, Elena found herself hoping for something more than just continued employment. The way Alexander had looked at her, the gentleness in his voice when he took her hand, could it mean something, or was she simply reading too much into his kindness? She forced herself to be realistic. She was a wet nurse, nothing more. Yes, Alexander had been kind about her confession, but that did not change the fundamental facts of their situation. He was a duke, and she was a village woman with a secret past, and a child she could not even claim publicly. But still her heart whispered. He had held her hand. He had called her sacrifice extraordinary. He had looked at her as if she were something precious, something valued beyond her service to his son. Elena closed her eyes and allowed herself, just for a moment, to imagine what it might be like if things were different. If she were a lady, if her son could be with her, if Alexander could look at her as a woman rather than just an employee. It was a beautiful dream, but Elena knew better than to let herself believe it could ever become reality. She had already sacrificed one impossible dream for the sake of her child's life. She could not afford to lose herself in another. But as the days passed, Elena found it increasingly difficult to maintain her emotional distance from Alexander. He began spending more time in the nursery, often arriving in the evenings to find her reading to James or singing him to sleep. You have a beautiful voice, he said one evening, leaning against the doorframe as Elena finished a lullaby. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. Thank you, Your Grace. My mother used to sing to me when I was small. I suppose I remember the melodies. Alexander moved into the room, approaching the cradle where James lay drowsing contentedly. He is growing so strong. Look at those arms, those legs. He will be a fine, sturdy boy. He has your eyes, Elena observed, then immediately regretted the personal comment. I mean, forgive me, Your Grace. I should not have. Please, Alexander said, turning to look at her. Do not apologize for noticing my son's resemblance to me. It pleases me to hear it. Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The way Alexander was looking at her, the warmth in his voice, it was becoming harder and harder to convince herself she was imagining his attention.
Elena, Alexander said suddenly, I have been thinking about what you told us in the garden, about your son William.
Elena's heart clenched. Your Grace, how long has it been since you have seen him? 4 months, Elena whispered. 4 months and 3 days. Alexander nodded thoughtfully. That is a long time for a mother to be separated from her child. It is the price I chose to pay, Elena said quietly. I knew what I was giving up when I came here. Yes, but... Alexander paused, seeming to wrestle with something. Elena, what if there were a way for you to see William without abandoning your duties here? Elena's breath caught. I do not understand, Your Grace. What if we arranged for William and his caregiver to visit the castle, just for a day, perhaps two? You could see your son, assure yourself of his well-being, and James would still have his wet nurse. Elena stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. You would do that? You would allow my son to come here? Elena, you have given everything for the sake of my child. The least I can do is help you spend a few hours with yours. Tears sprang to Elena's eyes. The kindness of the gesture, the thoughtfulness behind it, touched her more deeply than she could express. Your Grace, I do not know what to say. Say yes, Alexander said softly. Let me arrange this for you. Let me give you back, if only briefly, what you sacrificed for my son's sake. Elena could not speak through her tears, but she nodded, overwhelmed by gratitude and something deeper, something that felt dangerously like love. Alexander smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face. Good. I will send a messenger tomorrow. We will arrange for William to visit within the week. As he turned to leave, Elena found her voice. Your Grace? Why are you doing this for me? Alexander paused in the doorway, his hand resting on the frame. For a moment, Elena thought he might not answer. Then he turned back to look at her, and the expression in his eyes made her heart race. Because, Elena Hartwell, he said quietly, you deserve to have your sacrifice honored. And because, he paused, seeming to struggle with his words, because you have given me back my son's life, and I find myself wanting to give you back yours. Before Elena could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with her racing heart and the incredible possibility that the Duke of Ravenshollow might actually care for her as more than just a wet nurse. The next few days passed in a blur of anticipation and anxiety for Elena. Alexander had been true to his word, sending a messenger to arrange for William's visit. Mrs. Whitmore's sister, a kind woman named Sarah, had agreed to make the journey with William, bringing him to the castle for 2 full days. Elena could barely contain her excitement, but it was mixed with terror. How much had William changed in 4 months? Would he remember her? Would he be happy and healthy, or would she see in his little face the cost of her abandonment? Alexander watched Elena's emotional turmoil with growing concern and something deeper. Each day, he found himself more drawn to her, more impressed by her strength and character. The revelation of her sacrifice had only deepened his admiration for her, and he was beginning to realize that his feelings went far beyond gratitude or respect. You are pacing again, Lady Margaret observed one evening as Alexander walked restlessly around the drawing room. I am not pacing, Alexander protested, then immediately began pacing again. Lady Margaret smiled knowingly. Alexander, why do you not simply admit what has become obvious to everyone in the castle? What are you talking about? You are in love with her. Alexander stopped mid-stride, his back stiffening. That is ridiculous. Is it? You spend every evening in the nursery. You watch her with James, with an expression of such tenderness it makes my heart ache. You have arranged for her son to visit, something that goes far beyond the kindness any employer would show, and you are wearing a path in the carpet because you are worried about her emotional well-being. Alexander sank into a chair, running his hands through his dark hair. Margaret, even if what you say were true, it does not matter. She is a wet nurse. I am a duke. The scandal alone would be enormous. Since when do you care about scandal? You have never been one to bow to society's expectations. This is different. This would affect James, affect the duchy. I cannot be selfish in this. Lady Margaret moved to sit across from him, her expression serious. Alexander, let me ask you something. Do you believe Elena is a good woman? A woman of character and virtue? Of course. Her sacrifice for William and her devotion to James prove that beyond question. Do you believe she would be a good mother to James? That she already is, in fact. Alexander thought of how Elena sang to James, how she held him when he was fussy, how her face lit up with pride at his every milestone. Yes, James adores her, and she loves him as if he were her own. Then, what more do you need? Alexander, you lost Isabella tragically, and I know the guilt you carry over her death, but you cannot spend the rest of your life punishing yourself. Isabella would want you to be happy. She would want James to have a mother who loves him. But Elena is not of noble birth. The other dukes, the court, they would never accept her. Then they are fools, Lady Margaret said firmly. Alexander, I have known many duchesses in my time. Most of them were vapid, selfish creatures who cared for nothing but their own comfort and social position. Elena Hartwell has more true nobility in her little finger than most of them possessed in their entire bodies. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with his thoughts and feelings. Finally, he spoke. What if she does not return my feelings? What if she sees me only as her employer? Lady Margaret laughed softly. Oh, my dear brother-in-law, you truly are blind when it comes to matters of the heart. That girl looks at you as if you hung the moon and stars. She is as much in love with you as you are with her. You think, I know, I have eyes, Alexander. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Before Alexander could answer, Mrs. Pemberton appeared in the doorway. Your Grace, forgive the interruption, but a carriage has arrived. It is the woman with Elena's son. Alexander felt his heart leap. Already? But I thought they were not expected until tomorrow. They made better time than anticipated, Your Grace. Elena is, well, she is quite overcome. The baby is beautiful, Your Grace. A fine, healthy boy. Alexander rose immediately. Where are they now? In the blue guest room, Your Grace. Elena is with them. Alexander started toward the door, then paused. What was he doing? This was Elena's private reunion with her son. He had no right to intrude, but the desire to see her happiness, to witness this moment he had made possible, was overwhelming. Go, Lady Margaret said softly, understanding his dilemma. You gave her this gift. You have every right to see her joy. Alexander nodded and hurried from the room, his heart pounding with anticipation. As he approached the blue guest room, he could hear voices through the door, Elena's broken with tears, and another woman's, gentle and understanding. He knocked softly, and Elena's voice called out, "Come in." Alexander opened the door and stepped inside, then stopped short at the sight before him. Elena sat on the bed, holding a baby who was clearly her son. The resemblance was unmistakable. William had her green eyes and the same delicate features, though his hair was darker, more like his father's had probably been. But it was Elena's face that took Alexander's breath away. She was transformed, glowing with a joy so pure and radiant that it made her beautiful beyond description. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but they were tears of happiness, of relief, of overwhelming love. "Your Grace," she said, looking up at him with shining eyes, "this is William. This is my son." Alexander moved closer, studying the baby who looked remarkably like James, though perhaps a bit sturdier and more alert. William was clearly thriving under Sarah's care, his cheeks round and healthy, his eyes bright with curiosity. "He is beautiful, Elena," Alexander said sincerely, "and so much like James. They could be brothers." Elena's breath caught at his words, and something flickered in her eyes. Brothers. If only things were different, if only circumstances were not as they were, perhaps they could be. Your Grace, said Sarah, rising from her chair to curtsy, I am Sarah Whitmore. I cannot thank you enough for arranging this visit. Elena has sacrificed so much for your son's sake. It is kind beyond measure to allow her this time with William. Alexander inclined his head graciously. It is I who should thank you, Mrs. Whitmore, for caring so well for William. I can see he is thriving under your attention. He is a good baby, Sarah said fondly. Sweet-tempered like his mother, but with a strong will of his own. He has been asking for his mama, in his own way, reaching for women with dark hair, fussing when they do not smell right or sound right. Elena's tears flowed fresh at this news. He remembers me? Oh yes, dear. Look how he calms in your arms. He knows his mama. Never doubt that. Indeed, William had settled completely in Elena's embrace, his small hand fisted in her hair as he gazed up at her with obvious contentment. It was clear that despite the months of separation, the bond between mother and child remained strong. Alexander watched this reunion with a mixture of joy and something deeper, something that felt almost like envy. Not envy of Elena's happiness, but envy of the connection, the pure, uncomplicated love between mother and child. It made him think of James, of the bond that was forming between the baby and Elena, and of his own growing feelings for the remarkable woman who had saved his son's life. Mrs. Whitmore, Alexander said suddenly, I hope you will be comfortable here for the next 2 days. Mrs. Pemberton will see to anything you need, and please feel free to explore the gardens and grounds. The castle is at your disposal. You are very kind, Your Grace, but I confess, I am most looking forward to seeing how little James is faring. Elena speaks of him in every letter as if he were her own child. Elena looked up at Alexander, her eyes still bright with tears. Your Grace, would it be possible for Sarah to meet James? She has heard so much about him, and, of course, Alexander said immediately, perhaps after William has had time to settle in, we could arrange for both boys to be together. They are, as I said, almost like brothers. The word brothers hung in the air again, and Alexander saw Elena's eyes widen slightly. Was she thinking what he was thinking? That if circumstances were different, if he could find the courage to act on his feelings, the boys really could be brothers. That would be wonderful, Elena said softly. I have dreamed of having them together. Of seeing. She trailed off, perhaps realizing that she was revealing too much of her own impossible dreams. Alexander understood. He had been having similar dreams, visions of a future where Elena was not just James's wet nurse, but his mother in truth, where William was not a secret, but part of their family. It was a beautiful, impossible dream, but one that grew stronger every day. Well then, he said, clearing his throat, I will leave you to your reunion. Sarah, Elena, please let Mrs. Pemberton know if you need anything at all. As he turned to go, Elena called out softly, Your Grace? He paused, looking back. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. For this, for everything. I will never forget your kindness. Alexander met her eyes across the room, and in that moment, something passed between them, something that went far beyond gratitude and employer concern. It was recognition, acknowledgement of feelings that were growing stronger each day despite all the reasons they should not exist. You are very welcome, Elena, he said quietly. Enjoy your time with William. As Alexander left the room, he found Lady Margaret waiting in the corridor, having obviously been eavesdropping. Well, she asked. Well, what? How does it feel to have made the woman you love so happy? Alexander looked back toward the door of the blue guest room, from behind which came the soft sounds of Elena's voice as she talked to her son. "It feels," he said slowly, "like the most natural thing in the world, and the most terrifying." Lady Margaret smiled knowingly. "Good. That means you are finally ready to admit the truth." "What truth?" "That you love her, that you want to marry her, that you want to make both those boys your sons, not just James." Alexander stared at his sister-in-law, shocked by how accurately she had read his deepest, most secret desires. "Margaret, do not deny it. Alexander, I can see it written all over your face. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with the enormity of what Lady Margaret was suggesting. Could he really be considering proposing to Elena? Could he really be thinking of elevating a village wet nurse to the position of Duchess? But even as he asked himself these questions, Alexander knew the answers. Elena was not just a village wet nurse. She was an extraordinary woman who had demonstrated courage, nobility, and love that surpassed anything he had ever witnessed. She was already more of a mother to James than many titled ladies would ever be to their own children, and she had stirred feelings in him that he had thought died with Isabella. "I need time to think," he said finally. "Do not think too long," Lady Margaret warned. "A woman like Elena will not remain available forever, and a love like this, it does not come along twice in a lifetime." As Alexander walked slowly toward his study, Lady Margaret's words echoed in his mind. She was right, he knew. What he felt for Elena was real, deep, and growing stronger each day. The question was whether he had the courage to act on it, to risk the scandal and social upheaval that would surely follow. But as he thought of Elena's face as she held her son, of the joy he had been able to give her, Alexander began to think that perhaps some things were worth any risk. Perhaps some love was worth fighting for, no matter what the cost. Meanwhile, in the blue guest room, Elena was lost in the wonder of holding her son again. William had grown so much in 4 months, had developed from a tiny, fragile newborn into a sturdy, alert baby. He smiled now. Genuine smiles that lit up his whole face, and he babbled constantly, as if trying to tell her everything that had happened in her absence. "He is thriving, Elena," Sarah said softly, watching mother and child with fond eyes. "You made the right choice, painful as it was. He is healthy and happy, and he knows he is loved." "But I have missed so much," Elena whispered, touching William's soft cheek. His first smile, his first laugh, all those precious moments. "You sacrificed those moments so he could have a lifetime of them," Sarah replied firmly. "Elena, what you did, leaving your child to save him, it is the most selfless act of love I have ever witnessed. Do not torment yourself with guilt over missed moments. You gave him life itself." Elena nodded, knowing Sarah was right but unable to completely banish the ache in her heart. She had done what she had to do, but that did not make it less painful. "Tell me about the Duke," Sarah said suddenly. "Your letters speak of him with such warmth." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "He is a good man, kind, generous. He loves James deeply, and he has been more than fair to me." "And," Sarah prompted, clearly sensing there was more. "And nothing," Elena said quickly. "He is a duke, Sarah. I am a wet nurse. There is nothing more to say." But Sarah was not fooled. She had seen the way the Duke looked at Elena, had witnessed the tenderness in his voice when he spoke to her. More importantly, she had seen the way Elena's face lit up when he entered the room, the way her whole being seemed to orient toward him like a flower turning toward the sun. "Elena," Sarah said gently, "love does not recognize titles or station. If there is feeling between you, There is nothing between us, Elena said firmly. I will not allow myself to hope for things that can never be. I have already sacrificed one dream for William's sake. I will not lose myself in another impossible fantasy. But even as Elena spoke these words, she could not forget the way Alexander had arranged this visit, the kindness in his eyes, the gentle way he had taken her hand in the garden. Could Sarah be right? Could there be something more than kindness in his attention to her? Elena forced herself to push such thoughts away. She had 2 precious days with her son, and she would not waste them on impossible dreams. Whatever her feelings for Alexander might be, whatever his might be for her, they could never overcome the vast differences in their stations. She was here to care for James, nothing more, and she must never forget that. But as William smiled up at her, his little hand reaching for her face, Elena found herself wondering what it would be like if both her boys could grow up together, if she could be mother to both of them without having to choose between them. It was a beautiful dream, even if it could never be more than that. The next morning brought new challenges and revelations. Elena woke early, as had become her habit, to tend to James. But when she arrived at the nursery, she found Alexander already there, holding his son and speaking to him in low, gentle tones. "Good morning, Your Grace," Elena said softly, not wanting to interrupt the tender scene. Alexander looked up, and Elena was struck by the exhaustion in his eyes. He looked as if he had not slept at all. "Good morning, Elena. I hope you slept well." "Yes, thank you. William was very good through the night. Sarah says he always sleeps soundly in new places, which is a blessing." Elena paused, studying Alexander's haggard appearance. "Your Grace, forgive me for asking, but are you quite well? You look tired," Alexander suggested with a rueful smile. "Yes, I imagine I do. I spent most of the night walking and thinking." "About what, if I may ask?" Alexander was quiet for a moment, then handed James to Elena with careful gentleness. "About many things, about the future, about choices, about what we owe to those we love." Elena settled James in her arms, but her attention was focused entirely on Alexander. There was something in his tone, something in the way he looked at her, that made her heart begin to race. "Your Grace, Elena, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." Elena nodded, though she was not sure she was ready for whatever question he might pose. "Are you happy here? Truly happy? Not just resigned to your circumstances?" The question caught Elena off guard. Yes, Your Grace. I am happy. James brings me great joy, and you have been more than kind." "That is not what I mean," Alexander interrupted gently. "I mean, are you happy with your life as it is? Are you content to remain a wet nurse, to see William only occasionally, to live always in service to others?" Elena stared at him, unsure how to answer. The truth was complicated, full of contradictions and impossible desires. "I am grateful for what I have," she said carefully. "I am grateful to be able to care for James, to ensure William's well-being. But are you happy, Elena? Are you fulfilled?" Elena looked down at James, then back at Alexander, and for a moment she let her guard down completely. "No," she whispered. "I am grateful and I am content in many ways, but I am not truly happy. I miss my son every day. I long to have both my boys with me, to be a real mother to them both. I dream of—" She stopped, realizing she was about to reveal too much. "What do you dream of?" Alexander asked softly, moving closer. Elena's breath caught. She could not tell him the truth, that she dreamed of him, of a life where they could be together, where she could be his wife and mother to both James and William. It was too impossible, too presumptuous. I dream of having my children with me, she said, instead of not having to choose between them. Alexander nodded slowly. And if there were a way for that to happen, if there were a way for you to have both William and James in your life, fully and completely, Elena's heart began to pound. Your Grace, I do not understand what you are suggesting. Alexander took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for something. Elena, what I am suggesting is that perhaps there is a way for you to have everything you dream of. Both children, security, a place in the world that befits your true worth. How could that be possible? Alexander was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the gardens below. When he spoke again, his voice was so soft Elena could barely hear him. By becoming my wife. Elena felt the world tilt around her. Surely she had misheard. Surely the Duke of Ravenshollow had not just proposed marriage to her. Your Grace, she whispered, I think I misunderstood. No, Alexander said, turning to face her fully. You did not misunderstand. Elena Hartwell, I am asking you to marry me. Elena stared at him in shock, James forgotten in her arms as her mind reeled. You cannot be serious. I have never been more serious about anything in my life. But I am a wet nurse, a village woman. You are a duke. The scandal would be enormous. Alexander agreed. And I do not care. Elena, in the months you have been here, you have proven yourself to be more noble, more worthy of respect and admiration than any duchess I have ever known. You have sacrificed everything for the sake of 2 children, yours and mine. You have shown courage, wisdom, and a depth of love that humbles me. If that does not make you worthy of being a duchess, then the title itself is meaningless. Elena felt tears beginning to fall. This was beyond her wildest dreams, more impossible and more wonderful than anything she had ever dared to imagine. Alexander, she whispered, using his given name for the first time. I do not know what to say. Say yes, he said simply. Say you will marry me, and both William and James will have parents who love them. Say yes, and you will never have to choose between your children again. Say yes, and we will face whatever scandal and opposition comes together. Elena looked down at James, who was gazing up at her with his father's dark eyes, then thought of William, sleeping peacefully in the guest room with Sarah. Could it really be possible? Could she really have both her children and the man she had come to love more than she had thought possible? The nobility will never accept me, she said softly. They will call you mad, say you have married beneath your station. Let them, Alexander said fiercely. I have spent my entire life living according to other people's expectations, doing what was proper and expected. It brought me a good marriage with Isabella, but it also brought me years of loneliness before I found love. I will not make that mistake again. I will not let society dictate whom I love or whom I marry. But James, what will this mean for James? Will it hurt his prospects, his future? Alexander smiled, and the expression was full of tenderness and certainty. Elena, James already loves you as his mother. Making it official will only give him what he has always needed, a parent who will put his well-being above all else. As for his prospects, he will have a mother who will teach him the values that truly matter, kindness, sacrifice, love, that is worth more than any number of noble connections. Elena was crying freely now, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Alexander was offering her. Not just marriage, but a family. Not just security, but love. Not just a position, but a place where she truly belonged. And William, she asked through her tears. Will be my son in every way that matters, Alexander said firmly. I will adopt him legally, give him my name, raise him alongside James. They will be brothers, as they should be. Elena looked at him through her tears, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, The love that had grown between them over these months of shared care for James and quiet moments stolen in the nursery. "You really mean this?" she said wonderingly. "You really want to marry me?" "Elena Hartwell," Alexander said, kneeling beside her chair and taking her free hand in his. "I love you. I love your courage, your strength, your endless capacity for sacrifice and love. I love the way you sing to James, the way you smile when you think no one is watching, the way you put everyone else's needs before your own. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you just how precious you are." Elena could not speak through her tears, but she did not need to. The answer was written in her eyes, in the way her fingers tightened around his, in the radiant smile that broke across her face like sunshine after rain. "Yes," she whispered finally. "Yes, Alexander, I will marry you." Alexander's own eyes filled with tears as he brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Thank you," he said softly. "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for loving James. Thank you for being exactly who you are." Just then, James began to fuss, reminding them both of his presence. Elena and Alexander looked down at the baby, then at each other, and began to laugh through their tears. "I suppose we should tell him he is about to gain a mother and a brother," Elena said, her voice shaky with joy. "And I suppose we should tell William he is about to gain a father and a title," Alexander replied, grinning. Elena's smile faltered slightly. "Alexander, are you certain about this? About all of it? Once we announce our engagement, there will be no going back. The town will be scandalized. Your peers will question your judgment." "Elena," Alexander said firmly, "I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You are the woman I want to marry, the mother I want for my children, the Duchess I want by my side. Whatever challenges we face, we will face them together." Elena nodded, her fears not entirely gone, but overwhelmed by the joy and love filling her heart. "Then, yes," she said again. "Yes to all of it. Yes to marriage. Yes to family. Yes to facing whatever comes together." Alexander leaned forward and kissed her then, gently and tenderly, sealing their engagement with a promise of love and devotion that would last a lifetime. When they broke apart, both were crying and smiling at the same time. James, as if sensing the momentous change in his small world, gurgled happily and reached up toward both of them with his tiny hands. "He approves," Elena laughed, catching one of James's hands in her own. "Of course he does," Alexander said, stroking his son's cheek. "He has been trying to bring us together from the beginning. Haven't you, little one?" As if in response, James smiled one of his brightest smiles, and Elena felt her heart overflow with happiness. She was going to marry the man she loved. Her children would be brothers. She would never have to choose between them again. It was more than she had ever dared to dream, more than she had thought possible, and it was all real, all hers, all theirs. "When?" she asked suddenly. "When shall we marry?" Alexander grinned. "As soon as possible. I have waited long enough to make you my wife, Elena. I do not want to wait a day longer than necessary." Elena laughed, giddy with happiness. "But we must do this properly. The banns must be read. Arrangements must be made." "Leave all that to me," Alexander said. "I will speak to the bishop, arrange for a special license if necessary. We could be married within the month." "A month?" Elena repeated, hardly believing it. "In a month I will be the Duchess of Ravenshollow." "In a month," Alexander agreed. "You will be my wife. James will officially have his mother, and William will officially have his father. We will be a family, Elena. A real family." Elena felt fresh tears spring to her eyes at the beautiful simplicity of those words. A family. After all the sacrifice, all the heartbreak, all the impossible choices. She was finally going to have everything she had ever wanted. But there was still one more person who needed to know about this momentous change. Elena looked toward the door, thinking of Sarah and William in the guest room. "I should tell Sarah," she said, "and we should discuss what this means for William's future, where he will live." "He will live here, of course," Alexander said immediately. "This will be his home, just as it is James's. Sarah can continue as his nurse if you like, or we can make other arrangements. Whatever you think is best for William." Elena felt another wave of gratitude and love wash over her. Alexander was not just accepting William, he was embracing him completely, thinking of his needs and comfort. "I think William would benefit from having Sarah remain with him for now," Elena said thoughtfully. "The transition to living here will be enormous for him, and having a familiar caregiver will help. But eventually you will be his mother in truth as well as in heart," Alexander finished. "There is no rush, Elena. We will take this as slowly as William needs." Elena nodded, then looked down at James, who had fallen asleep in her arms. "And James? How do we explain this to him when he is old enough to understand?" "We tell him the truth," Alexander said simply, "that his wet nurse was so extraordinary, so loving and wonderful, that his father fell in love with her and made her his mother forever, that she brought him a brother, and that love made their family complete." Elena smiled through her tears. "It sounds like a fairy tale when you put it like that." "Perhaps it is," Alexander said, leaning over to kiss her forehead. "Perhaps that is exactly what this is, a fairy tale come true." As Elena sat there in the morning sunlight, holding the baby she had come to love as her own, engaged to the man who had captured her heart, with her own son sleeping safely nearby, she had to agree. This was a fairy tale, the kind she had never dared to believe could happen to someone like her. But fairy tales, she was learning, sometimes came true for those who were willing to sacrifice everything for love. And Elena Hartwell had proven that she was exactly that kind of person. The announcement of the Duke of Ravenshallow's engagement to his son's wet nurse sent shockwaves through English society. Drawing rooms buzzed with gossip, scandalized matrons clutched their pearls, and more than one ambitious mother mourned the loss of such an eligible bachelor to a mere village woman. But Alexander and Elena faced the storm together, just as he had promised they would. Lady Margaret proved to be their staunchest supporter, using her considerable social influence to ensure that anyone who dared to openly criticize the match would face her formidable wrath. "Let them gossip," she declared at one particularly vicious tea party. "My brother-in-law has chosen a woman of extraordinary character and virtue. If that offends your sensibilities, perhaps you should examine what you truly value in this world." The wedding was held 6 weeks later in the castle's private chapel, with only close friends and family in attendance. Elena wore Isabella's wedding dress, altered to fit her slighter frame, at Alexander's request, and with Lady Margaret's enthusiastic approval. "Isabella would have loved you," Lady Margaret told Elena as she helped arrange the antique lace veil. "She would have been so grateful to know that James would have such a loving mother and Alexander such a devoted wife." Elena touched the pearls at her throat, another loan from Isabella's jewelry collection, and felt the weight of the legacy she was inheriting. She was not replacing Isabella, she knew, but rather continuing her work of loving and protecting the people she had left behind. William, now officially William Alexander Thornfield, toddled down the aisle ahead of his new parents, scattering rose petals with the serious concentration only a baby could muster. James, held by Sarah, gurgled happily throughout the ceremony, as if he understood that this day would make official what had been true in his heart for months. When Alexander and Elena exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other through whatever trials might come, there was not a dry eye in the chapel. Even the bishop, initially skeptical of the unusual match, was moved by the obvious depth of their love and commitment. "You may kiss your bride," he said with a gentle smile, and Alexander did, tenderly and thoroughly, while their small congregation cheered. As they emerged from the chapel into the bright sunshine, Elena could hardly believe that she was now the Duchess of Ravenshollow. But more than that, she was a wife, a mother to two beautiful boys, and a woman who had found love in the most unexpected place. "No regrets?" Alexander asked softly as they walked toward the castle, William on his shoulders and James in Elena's arms. Elena looked around at her new family, at the life she had never dared to dream could be hers, and smiled. "None whatsoever," she said firmly. "This is where I belong, with you, with our sons, facing whatever comes next together." Alexander leaned over to kiss her again, and Elena knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, and there would be many, she was sure, they would face them as a family. She had sacrificed everything for love, and love had rewarded her beyond measure. In the distance, church bells rang out across the duchy, announcing to all the world that the Duke of Ravenshollow had married for love, and that sometimes the most beautiful fairy tales were the ones that began with the greatest sacrifices. Elena Hartwell had given up her own child to save another, and in doing so had found a love that would last forever. She had become not just a duchess, but a mother, a wife, and living proof that the greatest nobility comes not from birth, but from the courage to love without condition and sacrifice without counting the cost. As the bells continued to ring and their small family walked together toward their future, Elena sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. She had lost so much, but she had gained everything that truly mattered. And that, she knew, was the real magic of love, its power to transform loss into joy, sacrifice into blessing, and two lonely hearts into one unshakable family. The fairy tale was complete, but the real story, the story of their life together, was just beginning, and Elena could hardly wait to see what beautiful chapters lay ahead. Years later, when James and William were grown men with children of their own, they would ask their mother to tell them the story of how she came to marry their father, and Elena would smile, gather her grandchildren around her, and begin. "Once upon a time, there was a woman who had to make the hardest choice any mother could make. She had to give up her own child to save another, and every time she told the story, Elena would marvel anew at the mysterious ways of Providence that had taken her greatest sacrifice and transformed it into her greatest blessing. She had hired herself out as a wet nurse to save her son's life, never knowing that in doing so she would also save her own heart and find a love that would last for all eternity. The Duke had hired her as a wet nurse, not knowing she had lost her own child to save his. But in the end, none of them had lost anything. They had all been saved. Alexander from his grief, Elena from her desperation, and both boys from lives that would have been incomplete without the love that bound them all together. It was, Elena often reflected, the most beautiful kind of love story, one born not of convenience or attraction, but of sacrifice, devotion, and the willingness to put others' needs before one's own. And it was a love that would echo through generations, a testament to the truth that the greatest fairy tales are not the ones we read in books, but the ones we create with our choices, our courage, and our capacity to love without limit. Thank you for staying with us through this incredible journey of love, sacrifice, and redemption. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and let us know in the comments what you thought of Elena and Alexander's fairy tale romance. And don't forget to subscribe for more historical romance stories that will sweep you away to worlds where love conquers all. Until next time, remember that the greatest love stories are often born from the greatest sacrifices, and that true nobility comes not from birth, but from the courage to love without condition.